From the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor to the bloody shores of Okinawa, history's most horrific battles unfolded. On December 7, 1941, Japanese fighter planes descended upon the unsuspecting American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Over the course of the next 6 days, Japan would declare victory and the United States would declare war. And soon after, thousands of Americans were dying on remote Pacific islands. The path to victory in World War II for the Allies would be a long and bloody one. Here are the battles that defined America's island-hopping campaign in the Pacific. This is a World War II special episode. Our series is brought to you thanks to a production company. December 7, 1941 will live in infamy. The Japanese had launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In under 2 hours, over 2,400 Americans were dead. Battleships were sunk or damaged, including the USS Arizona, which exploded and killed more than 1,000 men. But perhaps even more importantly, the airfield at Pearl Harbor was largely intact. Within 8 hours of the attack, American fighters took off from the damaged base and headed out to intercept the Japanese fleet. The Japanese were already on their way back to Japan when they were met by American reinforcements from the Pacific Fleet. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons began. For 3 days, the two fleets traded blows. Both sides claimed victory. But the Japanese were forced to retreat, giving the Allies time to regroup. It was the last major engagement between the U.S. Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy, and it would be nearly 2 years before the two would meet again in a major battle. The Guadalcanal campaign raged for 6 months and resulted in one of the bloodiest battles between the USMC and the Imperial Japanese Army. When the Allies landed on Guadalcanal, they found themselves quickly overwhelmed by large numbers of entrenched Japanese troops. Despite being outnumbered, the Allies fought fiercely, inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese while suffering relatively light losses themselves. Throughout the first month of fighting, the Allies struggled to establish supply routes to the island. This led to extreme shortages of food, water, and ammunition, which took a heavy toll on their health and morale. As the Guadalcanal campaign dragged on, both sides began to bring in reinforcements. By mid-November, the Allies had established a strong beachhead and were pushing inland towards the Japanese positions. On November 15, 1942, the Allies launched a massive offensive that caught the Japanese by surprise. The Japanese were forced to abandon their positions and flee. As they retreated, they left behind an estimated 26,000 dead. The Allies suffered less than 3,000 casualties during the entire campaign. In February 1943, Lieutenant General Kruger's 6th Army landed near Layan Salamaua on the northern coast of New Guinea. Their mission? Captured the strategically important Japanese base at Wewak. The Allies advanced along 2 routes, one along the coast and the other through the Owen Stanley Range, while advancing through the mountains. The Allies encountered fierce resistance from the Japanese. Many of the troops had to be carried off the battlefield on stretchers, but the Allies pressed on, forcing the Japanese to retreat. After securing their flanks, the Allies advanced on Wewak from the east and west. On September 22, 1943, the Japanese commander ordered his troops to abandon their positions and retreat into the jungle. 6 weeks later, the Allies captured Wewak and advanced south to liberate more of the island. The Allies faced fierce resistance from the Japanese throughout the Gilbert's campaign. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies pushed on, capturing Tarawa and Macon, but it was the battle for the island of Guam that proved to be the most costly. As American troops approached the island, they were met by fierce resistance from Japanese forces, who had fortified the island's defenses. With heavy casualties, the Allies eventually captured the island, but not without paying a heavy price. The Gilbert's campaign demonstrated the tenacity and determination of the Japanese forces, who were willing to fight to the death rather than surrender. It also highlighted the heavy cost of war and the sacrifices made by the soldiers on both sides. The Marshall Islands campaign was the first major offensive in the Pacific since the Guadalcanal campaign. For the Allies, it represented an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to conduct large-scale amphibious operations. However, the Japanese army was well prepared and defended the islands fiercely. The Allies faced strong resistance, particularly in the battles for Watch and Eniwak. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies prevailed, capturing both islands. The Marshall Islands campaign showcased the strength and resilience of the Japanese military, which refused to surrender despite being outnumbered and outgunned. It also demonstrated the effectiveness of the Allies' combined military might, which was essential to their ultimate victory. The campaign also highlighted the importance of intelligence gathering and planning, as the Allies' success was due in part to their ability to gather accurate intelligence on Japanese defenses and troop movements. But no place in the Pacific did the Japanese defend more ferociously than at Peleliu. The tiny island was strategically important as it lay astride shipping lanes between the Marshall Islands and the Philippines. The Allies underestimated the strength of the Japanese defenses and the ferocity of their resistance. What followed was a brutal battle that lasted for 5 months. The Japanese commander, Colonel Nakazawa, had turned the island into a fortress with elaborate networks of tunnels and bunkers. He also had a small but determined force of around 2,000 troops. The Allies launched a series of attacks, but each one was met with heavy casualties. The Japanese were eventually forced to surrender, but not before inflicting heavy casualties on the Allies. The Battle of Peleliu was a turning point in the Pacific War. It marked the end of the Japanese capacity to launch major offensives, and it demonstrated the tenacity and determination of the Imperial Japanese Army. The Mariana Islands campaign included the capture of Saipan, Tinian, and Rota by the Allies. The campaign was a major turning point in the Pacific War, as it allowed the Allies to establish air bases in the Mariana Islands, from which they could launch long-range bombing raids on Japan. The Allies faced stiff resistance from the Japanese throughout the campaign, particularly in the battle for Saipan. The Japanese commander, General Saito, had fortified the island and was determined to prevent its capture. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies prevailed and captured all 3 islands. The Mariana Islands campaign demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Japanese military, which refused to surrender despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned. It also showcased the power of the U.S. military, which was able to conduct major amphibious operations over long distances. By late 1944, the Allies had advanced to within 80 miles of the Japanese mainland. Their goal was to seize the island of Leyte in the Philippines, but the Japanese had other plans. October 19, 1944, the Allies landed on Leyte, only to find themselves attacked by Japanese forces. The Allies were forced to retreat to their ships, where they came under attack by Japanese aircraft. With the help of their escort, the Allies fought off the Japanese and established a beachhead. But the fighting was far from over. The Allies faced constant attacks from Japanese forces who were determined to drive them out. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies held their ground, inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese. One of the most intense battles of the campaign was the Battle of Ormoc Bay. Japanese forces attempted to outflank the Allies and cut off their supply line to their base. But the Allies were prepared and fought back, inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese. The Allies eventually prevailed, capturing the island and establishing a strong base from which to launch attacks on other Japanese-held territories. The Leyte campaign was a major turning point in the Pacific War. It marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese military, and it demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Philippine and American forces. The battle for the island of Luzon in the Philippines was one of the most intense and costly battles of the Pacific War. The Allies faced fierce resistance from the Japanese, who had fortified the island and were determined to prevent its capture. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies prevailed, capturing the island and dealing a major blow to the Japanese war effort. But the victory came at a high cost. Thousands of Filipino and American soldiers lost their lives in the battle. The battle for Luzon was a turning point in the Pacific War. It marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese military, and it demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Filipino and American forces. When the Allies invaded the island of Mindanao in the Philippines, they faced fierce resistance from the Japanese, who had fortified the island and were determined to prevent its capture. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies prevailed, capturing the island and dealing a major blow to the Japanese war effort. The Allies continued their advance, liberating more of the Philippines and moving closer to Japan. But the fighting was far from over. The Allies faced constant attacks from Japanese forces who were determined to resist the occupation of their country. Despite heavy casualties, the Allies held their ground, inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese. As the Allies closed in on Japan, the Japanese were desperate to inflict as much damage as possible. They launched a massive attack on the beaches of Okinawa, but were repelled with heavy casualties. This marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese military, and it demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Allied forces. But the victory came at a high cost. Thousands of American and Okinawan soldiers lost their lives in the battle. What do you think? How do you think this battle would have ended if it wasn't for the dropping of the atomic bombs? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945. World War II had come to an end. All that remains is for me to thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. Till then, stay safe and stay tuned.